My Apache neighbor sighed. "I wish someone would love me. I thought, this is my chance." The rancher, a man who had spent most of his life tending to his land and animals, stepped outside his small cabin with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. He loved these quiet moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath, and the wind carried the smell of fresh earth and grass. On the edge of his property, he noticed movement near the fence that separated his land from his neighbor's. His neighbor was an Apache woman who lived alone in a modest house just beyond the trees. She had always seemed distant, reserved, and quiet, rarely speaking more than a few words when they crossed paths. Yet there was something about her, an air of sadness or maybe loneliness, that the rancher could not ignore. He had seen her many times, tending to her small garden, repairing fences, or walking along the dusty path that led to town. She moved carefully, as if every step was measured, and her eyes often seemed fixed on something far away, lost in thought. On this particular morning, he watched her struggle to lift a heavy bag of feed from the back of her truck. Without thinking, he set down his coffee and walked over to help. "Here, let me give you a hand," he said, his voice calm and friendly. She looked up at him, surprise flickering in her eyes, and then nodded. Together, they managed to carry the bag to the pen where her animals waited. As they worked, she didn't speak much, only a quiet thank you when the job was done. The rancher didn't mind the silence. There was something comforting about simply being near her, working side by side without the pressure of conversation. But then, as they straightened the fence posts, she let out a soft sigh that seemed heavier than it should have been. "I wish someone would love me," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her words hung in the air, fragile yet full of longing. The rancher froze for a moment. He wasn't sure if she meant it for him to hear, but he did. The words struck him like a sudden gust of wind. They were simple words, yet they carried a depth of loneliness and hope that he had never heard from her before. He stood there, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to reassure her, to promise that someone did care. But another part hesitated, knowing that these feelings could not be rushed or forced. He decided to just nod and smile gently, acknowledging her words without overstepping. "I hear you," he said softly, though he didn't yet know what that meant. From that moment, something inside him shifted. He realized that he had been given a glimpse into her heart, a quiet, fragile window of her true feelings. And with that realization came a sense of responsibility, not in a burdened way, but in a hopeful, almost tender way. He wanted to show her that she could be cared for, that her life didn't have to be so lonely. Over the next few days, he found himself paying more attention to the small details of her life. He noticed how she struggled with certain tasks on the ranch, how she worked tirelessly without complaint, and how she often paused to watch the horizon with a distant look in her eyes. He began offering subtle help, fixing a broken fence, leaving extra water for her animals, or carrying supplies when he happened to pass by. At first, she seemed hesitant, almost embarrassed to accept his assistance. But over time, she began to let him in, allowing small gestures of care without words. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, he found her sitting alone on the porch of her home, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the fading light. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Beautiful evening," he said casually, trying to sound light-hearted. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "It is," she replied softly, her voice almost a whisper. She didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly. He sat down on the porch step beside her, not too close, but near enough to be present. They watched the sun sink slowly, the sky turning shades of purple and gold. In that quiet moment, there was no need for words, only the shared presence of two people beginning to understand each other. As days turned into weeks, the rancher found himself thinking about her constantly. He wondered what her life had been like before she moved to this quiet corner of the world, what joys and heartbreaks she had experienced, and how it had led her to this moment of quiet longing. He didn't push for answers, knowing that trust and understanding took time. Instead, he focused on being reliable, someone she could count on without fear or expectation. He began to notice small signs that she was opening up, however subtly. A smile lingered a little longer when he helped her. A laugh escaped quietly when he told a joke, and she started engaging in small conversations that went beyond mere necessity. Each of these moments felt significant, a small bridge across the gap of loneliness that had existed for so long. One morning, he decided to bring her a basket of fresh eggs from his hens, along with some bread he had baked himself. When he knocked on her door, she opened it with a look of surprise and perhaps a hint of curiosity. "Good morning," he said warmly, holding out the basket. "I thought you might like these." She accepted the basket, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Thank you," she said softly. There was a pause, and then she added, almost shyly, "That was very thoughtful of you." The rancher felt a warmth spread through him at her words, a recognition that his small efforts were being noticed and appreciated. As he walked back to his property, he reflected on the simple but profound connection that had begun to form between them. It wasn't love yet, not in the grand, dramatic sense, but it was something real, tangible, and full of potential. He realized that this was a chance to be part of someone's life in a meaningful way, to show kindness and care where it had perhaps been absent for too long. That evening, as he sat by the fire in his cabin, he thought about her sigh, the one that had started it all. "I wish someone would love me." Those words had opened a door, and he knew he had to step through it carefully, with patience and understanding. He didn't want to rush, didn't want to overwhelm her, but he wanted to be there, to be the person who might one day fill that longing with genuine care and affection. Over the next few weeks, he continued his small acts of kindness, always respectful of her space, always ready to help when needed. He found that even simple gestures, a cup of water, a friendly wave, a shared smile, began to build trust and comfort between them. He paid attention to her moods, learning when to offer help and when to simply step back. Slowly, imperceptibly, a bond began to form, built on respect, empathy, and shared humanity. One afternoon, he found her struggling with a stubborn gate that refused to close properly. Without a word, he went over to help, and together they managed to fix it. As they stepped back, she looked at him with something like gratitude, but also something more, a recognition of his patience, his reliability, and perhaps a budding sense of companionship. That evening, as the sun set once more over the plains, he realized that the sigh he had heard weeks ago was no longer just a statement of loneliness. It was a quiet plea for connection, a signal that she was ready, perhaps slowly, tentatively, to accept friendship, care, and maybe even love. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt certain that this was the beginning of something meaningful, something that could grow over time into a deep, enduring bond. And so, in the quiet of the plains, amid the soft sounds of animals and the whispering wind, the rancher made a silent promise to himself. He would be there for her, gently, patiently, and with an open heart, hoping that one day he might be the answer to the sigh that had changed everything. The rancher had begun to notice changes in himself. Every time he saw his Apache neighbor, a quiet warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't love yet, not the kind that made hearts race or words stumble, but it was something tender, a sense of care that he had not felt in a long time. He realized that even small interactions with her brought him a sense of fulfillment and purpose he had not expected. It was another bright morning when he decided to take his small acts of kindness one step further. He had noticed that she often struggled with carrying water to her animals. The paths on her land were uneven, and the sun could be harsh. That day he arrived with a set of sturdy buckets and a small wagon. "I thought this might make things a little easier for you," he said, keeping his tone casual, though his heart was beating faster than usual. She looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You didn't have to," she said softly, her voice carrying that same gentle mixture of caution and curiosity he had come to recognize. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Together they moved the water, the wagon making the job lighter and quicker. As they worked, they spoke a little more than before, talking about practical things, the weather, the soil, the animals. Their conversation was simple, yet each word seemed to bridge the distance that had long existed between them. She laughed quietly at one point when a goat stubbornly tried to climb into the wagon, and he noticed how the sound, soft and rare, lingered in his mind long after the moment passed. After finishing the work, they sat for a moment on the edge of the pen, watching the animals drink. The rancher observed her closely. She was no longer just the quiet neighbor who sighed about wanting love. She was becoming a real person to him, full of small quirks and gentle movements, full of resilience that made him respect her even more. He realized he wanted to know her, not just her needs, but her thoughts, her dreams, the stories she rarely shared with anyone. Over the next few days, he continued finding small ways to be present in her life without being intrusive. He left fresh bread at her doorstep one morning, simply because he had baked more than he could eat. He helped repair a loose board in her fence another day, and occasionally stopped to chat briefly when he saw her tending the garden. Each gesture was small, almost ordinary, but they carried a quiet message. He noticed her, he cared, and he was there. She began responding, slowly and subtly. At first it was just a nod, a brief smile, or a quiet thank you. But then, one afternoon, as they were repairing a broken wheel on a cart, she looked at him and said, "I'm glad you're here. It helps having someone around." The rancher felt a sudden warmth in his chest. That simple sentence, spoken with sincerity, carried more weight than he could have imagined. It was the first time she had spoken about needing him, not just acknowledging his help, but expressing that his presence mattered. He didn't rush to respond with words. Instead, he smiled and nodded, letting the moment linger. Over time, their shared activities became a quiet routine. On hot afternoons, he would bring cold water and join her while she worked outside. When it rained, he would offer to help secure her animals and make sure everything stayed dry. She started to look forward to these moments, and he noticed the way she would glance toward his property with a faint smile when she saw him coming. Their conversations began to deepen, still careful and light, but touching more personal topics. She spoke about her childhood in the Apache community, the lessons her parents had taught her, and the few close friends she had left. He listened, offering encouragement and empathy, never judging or interrupting. He realized that trust was forming between them, delicate but real, like the first shoots of a plant growing through the soil. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, he found her sitting on the porch steps with a basket of herbs she had just picked. The sky glowed in soft shades of orange and purple, and a cool breeze whispered through the trees. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Evening," he said softly, leaning against the railing nearby. "Evening," she replied, her voice calm, but he noticed a flicker of something more, an almost hidden relief at his presence. They sat together in silence for a few minutes, watching the shadows stretch across the land. He realized that these moments, so simple and unremarkable to anyone else, were becoming important to both of them. They did not need words to connect. Just being there, sharing the quiet of the evening, was enough. Over time, the rancher began to notice more about her. He saw the small gestures of independence she maintained despite her loneliness. The way she tended her garden meticulously, the pride she took in caring for her animals, the way she organized her home with quiet precision. These were signs of strength and resilience, and they made him respect her even more. He admired how she managed her life with quiet dignity, even when the world had not been kind. One afternoon, he offered to help her repair a section of roof that had been damaged in a recent storm. She hesitated, almost instinctively, but then nodded. Together, they worked carefully, moving tiles and securing beams. During breaks, they talked about lighter things, favorite foods, simple memories from childhood, and small dreams for the future. She laughed quietly at one point, a sound so rare and fragile that he felt privileged to hear it. It was during these shared tasks that the rancher began to understand something important. The connection between them was not about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about showing up, being reliable, listening, and caring in ways that mattered in everyday life. He realized that love, real love, often started with these quiet, consistent acts rather than sudden declarations. Over the next several weeks, he continued to be present, always mindful of her boundaries and feelings. He left small gifts, fresh fruit from his orchard, a jar of honey, a handwritten note with encouragement. Each time he watched her closely for reactions, and each time he noticed subtle signs of appreciation. A smile lingered a little longer, a glance held for a moment, or a soft word of thanks that carried more meaning than she realized. One evening, as he walked past her property on his way back from the town, he noticed her sitting on a small bench near the edge of her garden. The sun had set, leaving only a faint glow in the sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and earth. She looked up as he approached, and their eyes met. In that instant, he felt a quiet understanding pass between them. No words were needed. They had been slowly building something that was now undeniable: trust, comfort, and the beginnings of a bond that went beyond simple neighborly kindness. That night, as he sat in his cabin, he reflected on everything that had happened over the past weeks. He thought about her sigh, her quiet words of longing, and the moments they had shared since. He realized that his feelings were growing, shifting from simple concern to something deeper. He didn't rush these emotions, understanding that they needed time and patience. He wanted her to feel safe and cared for before any confession of love could happen. He also reflected on her subtle gestures, how she had started to rely on him without words, how she looked for him when he wasn't around, and how her quiet laughter had begun to fill his thoughts. He knew that she was lonely, yes, but he also realized that she was strong and capable. His role, he thought, was not to fix her life but to stand beside her, offering steady support and friendship. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them continued to grow. He noticed small signs of change in her demeanor. Her posture seemed lighter, her movements less tense, and her eyes occasionally sparkled when they met his. These were small victories, but to him, they were proof that his presence mattered, that his efforts to care and support were making a difference. One morning, as he brought over a basket of freshly picked vegetables, she greeted him with a small smile, more genuine than before. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but warm. "Good morning," he replied, smiling back. He placed the basket on the porch railing and paused, noticing the way her eyes lingered on his face, curious and open. They spent the next hour talking, laughing quietly, and sharing the simple joys of life on the ranch. That moment, ordinary to an outsider, was extraordinary to him. It was proof that trust and connection could grow from patience, kindness, and genuine care. By the end of part 2, the rancher understood something fundamental. The bond they were building was more than friendship. It was a quiet, unfolding journey of mutual respect, understanding, and slowly growing affection. He knew the path ahead would require patience, empathy, and courage, but he also knew that he was ready to walk it, step by step, alongside her. The days grew longer, and the rancher found himself spending more time near his Apache neighbor's property. Each morning, he would finish his own chores and then make his way over to check on her, often finding some small task he could help with. It was never forced or rushed. He had learned that patience and consistency mattered more than grand gestures. She had begun to expect his presence, though she never said it outright, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his help was appreciated. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, painting the sky with pale gold. He noticed her struggling with a tangle of barbed wire along the fence. The strands had twisted during a recent storm, and the goats had managed to push through, creating a mess that needed urgent fixing. He walked over quietly, carrying a toolbox and gloves. "Good morning," he said softly, offering a friendly smile. She looked up, startled for a moment, and then gave a small nod. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was calm but carried that subtle undertone of relief he had come to recognize. Together, they worked carefully, untangling the wire and securing the posts. As they worked side by side, their conversation flowed easily, touching on small daily matters: how the crops were growing, the unpredictable weather, and the challenges of ranch life. She laughed quietly at one point when a goat tried to nibble his sleeve, and he noticed that her laughter, so soft and rare, made the air around them feel lighter. He began to notice more of her subtle expressions, the way her eyes softened when she was focused, the tiny smile she would give when she felt pleased, and the gentle way she moved her hands when explaining something. These small details, he realized, spoke volumes about her personality, her resilience, and the depth of her character. Each moment he spent with her deepened his understanding, and slowly he found himself thinking about her even when he was far away. After the fence was finally repaired, they sat on the edge of the pen for a while, catching their breath. The rancher had brought a small jug of water, and he handed it to her with a smile. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his briefly, and he felt a warmth spread through him at that simple touch. "Thank you," she said quietly. There was no need for more words. The gesture itself carried all the meaning they both understood. In the following days, he continued to find ways to be present in her life without overstepping. Sometimes it was helping carry feed or repairing equipment. Other times, it was simply sitting nearby while she worked, offering silent companionship. She began to respond in small ways: a smile that lingered a little longer, a quiet question about his day, or the way she would glance toward him when he appeared. Each of these signs reassured him that trust and comfort were growing between them. One afternoon, he noticed her sitting alone on the porch, sketching something in a small notebook. Curious, he approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt. "That looks interesting," he said gently. She looked up, startled for a moment, then nodded. "It's just a sketch," she replied softly. Her voice carried a hint of pride, and he could see that creating these drawings was something important to her, something personal she was willing to share in a small way. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her, and looked at the sketches. They were simple, yet beautiful scenes of her land, her animals, and the landscape she loved. "You have a real talent," he said honestly. Her eyes widened slightly at the compliment, and he noticed a faint blush on her cheeks. She looked down at her notebook, murmuring a quiet thank you. From that day on, he began to understand more deeply who she was. Not just the lonely neighbor who had sighed about wanting love, but a person with passions, dreams, and talents that had been quietly hidden from the world. He realized that his role was not just to help her with chores, but to support her as a person, to encourage her, and to show that someone truly cared about her life and her happiness. As their days together continued, he noticed small but meaningful changes in her behavior. She seemed more relaxed around him, more willing to speak her mind, and more open to laughter and shared moments. He felt a quiet pride in these changes, understanding that trust and friendship were growing steadily. At the same time, he began to recognize the stirrings of deeper feelings within himself. He cared for her in ways he had not anticipated, and the thought of her happiness became as important to him as his own. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and purple and the sun began to set, he found her sitting quietly on the porch steps, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He walked over slowly and sat beside her, careful not to disturb the calm. For a few moments they sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the hills, listening to the soft sounds of the evening, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the gentle sigh of the wind. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's peaceful here, isn't it?" "It is," he replied. "It's one of the best parts of living out here." She nodded, her eyes still on the horizon. Then, almost hesitantly, she added, "I like having someone to share it with." The rancher felt a jolt of warmth at her words. It was the first time she had expressed that she valued his presence in a way that went beyond simple neighborly appreciation. He didn't rush to respond with grand declarations. Instead, he simply nodded and offered a gentle smile. The moment itself, quiet and unspoken, was enough. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened further. They began to share more personal stories, memories from childhood, experiences that had shaped who they were, and small dreams for the future. The rancher listened with care, never judging, never interrupting, simply being there for her as a steady presence. In turn, she began to trust him more, sharing thoughts and feelings she had kept hidden for years. He noticed how she would sometimes pause in her work, glancing toward his property as if hoping he might appear. He saw the way her eyes would light up when he arrived with a small gift or a helping hand. These signs, subtle though they were, gave him confidence that their connection was growing stronger, that trust and affection were developing naturally over time. One afternoon, he brought over a basket of fresh fruits and vegetables from his garden. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said, placing the basket gently on her porch railing. She looked at him, her eyes softening, and a small, genuine smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying warmth and appreciation. They spent the rest of the afternoon working together in her garden, planting, watering, and tending to the soil. He noticed how she laughed quietly when a bird landed nearby, and he felt a quiet joy at the sound. He realized that these simple, everyday moments were becoming some of the most meaningful experiences of his life. As evening approached, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn deep shades of orange and purple. She leaned back, relaxed for the first time in a long while, and he realized that she felt safe in his presence. That realization filled him with a quiet satisfaction and a growing sense of responsibility. He wanted to be someone she could always rely on, someone who would support her, care for her, and perhaps, in time, love her. The rancher also began to reflect on his own feelings. He realized that his care for her had grown into something more profound than simple kindness. He thought about her often, wondered about her day, and felt a quiet longing when he was away from her. He understood that patience was necessary, that trust and love could not be rushed, but he also knew that his feelings were real and important. One day, as they worked together repairing a section of fence, she paused and looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "You've been very kind," she said quietly. "I don't think I've ever had anyone care like this before." The rancher felt a lump in his throat. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight of truth that touched him deeply. "I just want to help," he replied softly. "You deserve kindness and care, and I'm happy to give it." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and returned to her work. He watched her for a moment, feeling a quiet admiration and affection. It was in these small exchanges, these everyday moments of shared effort and understanding, that their bond grew stronger. By the end of part 3, the rancher and his neighbor had developed a deep, quiet connection built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Their friendship had grown into something more meaningful, a bond that hinted at the possibility of love without yet demanding it. They had come to understand each other in ways that few people ever did, and both felt a sense of comfort and security in the other's presence. Though neither had spoken the words, "I love you," the foundation had been laid. It was a connection built not on grand gestures or dramatic moments, but on patience, kindness, shared work, and quiet understanding. The rancher knew that the journey ahead would require care and sensitivity, but he also knew that this was the beginning of something rare and beautiful, an emotional connection that had the potential to grow into true love over time. And so, as the sun set on another day, painting the plains in soft shades of gold and purple, the rancher felt a quiet hope. He knew that he and his neighbor were walking a path together, slowly and steadily, and that their bond was deepening with each shared moment, each act of kindness, and each quiet conversation under the wide, open sky. The seasons were slowly changing, and the rancher noticed the slight chill in the air as autumn approached. The mornings were crisp, and the earth carried the smell of fallen leaves mixed with the scent of livestock. He had grown accustomed to seeing his Apache neighbor each day, and in return, she seemed to expect his presence without saying it aloud. Their bond had grown stronger, but now, subtle challenges began to test the quiet trust and connection they had built. One morning, the rancher saw her struggling with her water pump. It had broken overnight, leaving her animals without fresh water. He hurried over, carrying tools and a jug of water. She looked flustered but tried to hide it. "I thought I could fix it myself," she said quietly, a trace of frustration in her voice. "You can try, but sometimes it's easier with two people," he replied gently. She hesitated but nodded. Together they worked to repair the pump, their hands moving carefully and efficiently. During the process, they talked lightly, sharing stories about past repairs and small adventures on the ranch. But he noticed a tension in her posture, a worry in her eyes, as if she was used to handling everything alone and now had to accept help. It was the first real test of their growing bond. She had always been independent, managing her land and animals with quiet strength. Letting someone help her, even him, challenged her sense of self-reliance. The rancher understood this, so he focused on being patient, encouraging, and gentle. "It's okay to accept help," he said softly. "It doesn't make you weak. We're just working together." She gave a small smile, though it was tinged with uncertainty. By the time the pump was fixed, the sun was high and her animals were drinking freely again. The rancher felt a quiet satisfaction, not from the work itself, but from seeing her relief. She looked at him, and for a moment the usual caution in her eyes softened. Over the following days, subtle challenges continued to appear. Some neighbors watched their growing closeness with curiosity, and occasionally there were whispers about the rancher and his Apache neighbor spending so much time together. At first they tried to ignore it, but it was impossible not to feel the sting of judgment and speculation. She worried about how others might see her, and he sensed her hesitation, though she never voiced it outright. One evening, a strong windstorm swept across the plains. Trees swayed, dust and leaves whirled through the air, and the sound of branches breaking filled the quiet ranch. He rushed to her property, concerned that her home and animals might be in danger. She was already outside, struggling to secure her animals in the pens. He joined her immediately, lifting heavy gates and moving supplies to safe spots. "Thank you," she said breathlessly, her hair whipping around her face in the wind. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'm here and I'll help." The storm was intense, but together they managed to protect her animals and secure the property. By the time it subsided, both were soaked, tired, and muddy. Yet in that shared struggle, something profound happened. They realized how much they relied on each other. In the face of challenges, their bond had strengthened. After the storm, they sat together on her porch, wrapped in blankets and sipping warm tea. Silence stretched comfortably between them. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the evening. I think I've been afraid of letting anyone in," she admitted softly. He reached out and gently touched her hand, a reassuring gesture. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You can trust me. I won't hurt you." Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. That moment marked a turning point. She had begun to acknowledge not only her trust in him, but also the growing feelings she had tried to keep hidden. The rancher felt a surge of hope, tempered by the understanding that their relationship was still delicate and required patience. As the days passed, the rancher noticed more signs of her growing openness. She invited him to help with small projects inside her home, like fixing a broken shelf or arranging furniture. She shared meals with him more frequently, and their conversations began to touch on deeper subjects, hopes for the future, memories of family, and even fears about being alone. He listened with care, offering comfort without judgment, and she began to lean on him more emotionally, sharing thoughts she had long kept to herself. One afternoon, they worked together repairing a section of her roof that had been damaged in the storm. She climbed up with confidence, but he stayed close, ready to assist. During a break, she sat beside him on the edge of the roof, the wind brushing their faces. "I never realized how much easier it is to face challenges when someone is with you," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to face things alone," he replied softly. "We can handle it together." Her gaze softened, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The rancher realized that their connection had deepened into something more than friendship. They had begun to share not only tasks and chores, but also emotions, fears, and the unspoken understanding that they could rely on each other in difficult times. However, challenges were not limited to physical work or storms. Emotional vulnerabilities began to surface. She sometimes withdrew, a reminder of past experiences and pain she had endured. There were moments when he sensed sadness lingering in her eyes, moments when she sighed quietly as if carrying invisible burdens. The rancher learned to be patient, to offer support without pressing, and to be present even when words were unnecessary. One evening, she shared a memory from her childhood, speaking softly about times when she felt invisible or unimportant. He listened attentively, never interrupting, allowing her to express her feelings fully. When she finished, he gently said, "You are important. You matter more than you know." She looked at him, a tear escaping despite her best efforts to hide it. I've never had anyone say that to me before," she whispered. "Then hear it now," he replied firmly, his hand resting gently over hers. "You are important. You are valued. And I care about you." The emotional honesty of that moment deepened their bond further. She realized that she could trust him not only with her daily struggles, but also with her heart, and he recognized that his feelings had grown into something tender and genuine. Over the next few weeks, they continued to face challenges together, both practical and emotional. There were days when fatigue, weather, or other responsibilities tested their patience, but they learned to support each other through every difficulty. They celebrated small victories, the successful repair of a broken fence, a well-tended garden, a moment of shared laughter after a long day. Each triumph, no matter how small, strengthened the trust and connection between them. One afternoon, while tending to her animals, she paused and looked at him thoughtfully. "You've been here for me so much," she said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "Being here, helping you, spending time with you, it's enough. I want to be here." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, he noticed a subtle warmth that had not been there before. She was beginning to see him not just as a helpful neighbor, but as someone she could rely on, someone who cared deeply and consistently. The rancher felt a quiet joy, knowing that his patience and gentle persistence were building a foundation of trust and emotional connection. Later that evening, they sat together on her porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool autumn air. They watched the stars appear in the clear sky, the vastness of the plain stretching before them. "I feel safer with you around," she admitted softly. "You are safe," he said, his voice calm but full of conviction. "I'll always be here for you." Her hand found his, a small but significant gesture of trust and affection. In that simple touch, they acknowledged the bond that had grown between them. A connection built not on grand declarations or dramatic moments, but on shared experiences, mutual support, and quiet, consistent care. By the end of part 4, both the rancher and his neighbor had faced real challenges that tested their trust, patience, and emotional resilience. They had confronted storms, judgment from others, and their own insecurities, but through it all, they had grown closer. Their relationship had moved beyond simple friendship into a space where love could begin to take root, nurtured by respect, understanding, and shared struggles. Though neither had spoken the words, "I love you," their actions and quiet moments conveyed a depth of feeling that words alone could not capture. The rancher understood that the path ahead would continue to have challenges, but he felt confident that they could face them together. And she, in turn, realized that she could allow herself to trust someone, to accept help, and to let her heart slowly open to the possibility of love. As the night settled over the plains, the rancher sat quietly in his cabin, reflecting on the journey they had taken together. He thought about the storms they had weathered, the small victories, the laughter, and the quiet conversations. He realized that love, in its truest form, often grew from these simple, consistent acts of care and support. It was a slow, deliberate process, but one that built strength and resilience in a relationship that could last a lifetime. And so, as the stars shone brightly over the vast, open plains, both the rancher and his neighbor drifted to sleep with a quiet hope. They had faced challenges together, supported each other through difficulties, and built a bond rooted in trust, respect, and shared humanity. The foundation for something truly special had been laid, and both knew, deep in their hearts, that the next chapter of their journey could lead to love, gentle, patient, and enduring. The rancher woke up to the soft glow of morning, the horizon painted in shades of gold and pink. Today felt different, though he could not yet put his finger on why. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his Apache neighbor's eyes the day before, or the subtle warmth he felt when she had reached for his hand on the porch. Whatever it was, he knew that their bond had reached a point where it could no longer remain only unspoken gestures and silent companionship. He carried his coffee out to the small bench near the edge of his property, the place where he often watched the sunrise. Moments later, he saw her walking toward him, a basket of fresh herbs in her hands. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held something more, an unspoken question, a gentle hope. He smiled at her, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, setting the basket down beside him. She paused for a moment as if gathering courage, then said, I wanted to spend some time with you today." He nodded, his heart quickening. "I'd like that," he replied. They spent the morning tending to the garden, planting seeds and watering the soil. The work was simple, yet the rhythm of their movements together felt intimate. He noticed how her hand brushed against his occasionally, how her laughter seemed lighter, freer than before, and how her presence filled the air with a quiet warmth. As the sun climbed higher, they paused to rest, sitting side by side on the garden bench. The rancher looked at her, realizing that he could no longer deny his feelings. He cared for her deeply, not just as a neighbor, not just as someone who needed help, but as someone who had captured his heart with her strength, her kindness, and her quiet resilience. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice steady but gentle. She turned to look at him, curiosity and perhaps a touch of apprehension in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I care about you," he said, "more than just as a friend. I think I love you." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she did not speak. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of animals. Then, a small smile curved her lips, and she reached for his hand. I've been hoping you would say that," she admitted. The rancher felt a rush of relief and happiness. Her words confirmed what he had been feeling for weeks, and the bond they had built through patience, trust, and shared experiences had finally blossomed into something deeper. Over the next few hours, they spoke openly about their feelings, their hopes, and their fears. She shared moments from her past, the loneliness she had endured, and the walls she had built around her heart. He listened, offering comfort and understanding, reassuring her that she did not have to be afraid of being loved. Each word, each gesture, strengthened the connection between them, turning their relationship into a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. That evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of the earth and the quiet life they had built together. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a simple gesture of trust and intimacy, and he wrapped an arm around her, feeling a sense of completeness he had never known before. In the days that followed, they continued to share life's simple pleasures, working the land, caring for animals, preparing meals together, and enjoying quiet moments under the vast sky. Their relationship was no longer just about helping or being present. It was about partnership, love, and shared dreams. They discovered joy in small gestures, a smile over breakfast, a laugh while tending the animals, a quiet conversation as the sun set. Each moment reinforced their bond, building a life together founded on trust, care, and affection. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence near the edge of the property, she paused and looked at him. "I never imagined I could feel this way," she said quietly. "I thought love was something I would never have." "You deserve love," he replied firmly. "You deserve someone who cares for you, who stands by you, and who sees you for who you truly are. I'm here, and I want to be that person." Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and joy. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly, and he felt the warmth of her trust and the depth of her feelings. Their days continued in this rhythm, a blend of work, laughter, quiet reflection, and shared experiences. They learned more about each other's strengths, fears, and dreams. He admired her independence and determination, while she cherished his patience, kindness, and reliability. Together, they created a life that was grounded in mutual respect, love, and understanding. One evening, as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, they sat side by side on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. She rested her head against his shoulder and whispered, "I feel safe with you. I feel loved." He kissed the top of her head gently, holding her close. "And I will always be here," he said softly. "I promise you, no matter what happens, I'll be here." Their love, built slowly over time through patience, care, and shared challenges, had reached a point of quiet certainty. They knew that life would bring obstacles, but they also knew that together they could face anything. Their bond was strong, resilient, and enduring, a testament to the power of trust, understanding, and consistent acts of kindness. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons continued to change. The rancher and his Apache neighbor spent mornings tending the garden, afternoons repairing fences, and evenings watching the sun set over the plains. Each day was filled with shared laughter, quiet conversation, and moments of reflection. They celebrated small victories together, comforted each other in times of difficulty, and found joy in the ordinary beauty of life. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, she turned to him and said, "I never thought I could feel this happy, this cared for." "You deserve it," he replied softly. "You deserve all the happiness and love the world can give." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face. In that moment, he realized that their journey, beginning with a simple sigh, small gestures of kindness, and quiet trust, had led them to a love that was deep, genuine, and enduring. By the end of part 5, they had fully embraced their relationship. The rancher's patience, empathy, and quiet dedication had shown her that she was worthy of love. She, in turn, had allowed herself to trust and open her heart, discovering joy and companionship that she had once thought impossible. Together, they had built a life of shared work, laughter, and love, proving that even in the quiet, ordinary moments of life, extraordinary connections could grow. And so, as the stars twinkled above the vast plains and the wind whispered softly through the trees, the rancher and his Apache neighbor sat together, hands entwined, hearts full, knowing that the journey they had taken, step by step, day by day, had brought them to a love that, would endure through every season, every challenge, and every quiet moment of life. Their story, which began with a simple sigh and a longing for connection, had blossomed into a life filled with warmth, trust, and love. It was a love that had been nurtured patiently, grown through small gestures, and strengthened by shared experiences. And as they sat together under the wide-open sky, they both knew, without words, that they had found in each other something rare, something lasting, and something beautiful.